Hi everyone. Hope the hurricane is treating you kindly. That's a weird sentence. Hope you're staying safe, staying dry. Came in to finish the lesson. Mrs. McDowell is with me. And so we're going to go over the rest of the Athens and Sparta slideshow. So break out your notes, get that T-chart ready. I know some of you guys got through the slides on Spartan women and on the Helots, so go ahead, you can click forward in the video to get to the stuff you need on Athens. All right, so for those of you who don't have it, Spartan women. Women in Sparta were actually unique throughout all of the other Greek polis because they're the ones who got an education. Um, that's important because obviously Sparta wanted their women to be educated because they wanted them to be able to run the city while the men were out stabbing other people in the face. Spartan law also didn't allow women to marry until later in life. That was actually so they could produce healthier children, but as a happy side effect, it also made the women healthier because it turns out it's not good for 14-year-olds to have kids. Who knew? Last but not least, Spartan law was the same for men and women regarding divorce, and so that meant that Spartan women could request divorce, which is actually pretty unique throughout world history. Now, keep in mind, the vast majority of the Spartan population was actually made up of a group of people called helots, basically slave people. Now, this isn't chattel slavery where people are bought and sold. These people lived normal lives. It was just that every now and again the Spartans would show up and kill a few of them to keep them in line. These people had very few rights. They were expected to do the farming for the polis of Sparta, for the Spartan population. And given their big numbers, the Spartans would use violence and intimidation to keep them in line. Now, in the city of Sparta itself, and I am going to underline this one because it's important to note that not everybody was a helot or a Spartan. Sparta also had a group, a class of free non-Spartans. Wow, that's a terrible line. In the city itself, those are people from other Greek polis who were expected to handle jobs like making pottery, making really anything, including the Spartans' weapons, because the Spartan men were not supposed to have any job other than soldiering, and Spartan women, while educated, were not allowed to do certain jobs. Now on to Greece's other major polis in the classical era, Athens. Athens is located to the north and east of Sparta. It's on the coastline, as you can see from this map. It's actually the capital of modern Greece, too. And Athens started out, Athens' real salient feature is its government. In 594 BCE, a guy named Solon made massive changes to the Athenian constitution. Solon was a tyrant, you should know what that means, but he does give political rights to the lower classes while maintaining a still largely one-man system of rule. Now that is important. You need to know the Athenian constitution begins to get changed into a democracy by a tyrant, which is a weird sentence. Solon's changes didn't actually solve class conflict, but they do open the way to Athenian democracy. And in 508 BCE, after some political changes that you do not need to know, Athens became a democracy being run by the people of the polis. Again, that's in that reading. I'm not going to go too far into the depth. Just know that the Athenian constitution was a lot more complicated than you'd think. This right here on the right-hand side, that is a flow chart of the Athenian constitution, and if you can make sense of it, you're doing better than I am. And this is must-know information. You probably wrote it down on the Greek government readings, but on the off chance that you didn't, you need to know that Athenian democracy was a big deal. It was much different than any other system of government that had come before it. It was a true revolution, but it did not apply to all of the people of the polis. It didn't even apply to most of the people of the polis. By the way, if you see that word Attica right there, that just refers to the area ruled by Athens. Athens' democracy did not apply to women. so that's about half of the population. It didn't apply to people of foreign birth. It didn't apply to slaves. In fact, and it didn't apply to men of a certain age. In fact, it probably only applied at any given point in time to about 1/10 of the population. Still better than an oligarchy or a monarchy or a tyranny, but not exactly the same thing as, an actual democracy as we would think of it. So, having covered over government, now let's do the other thing we focused on. Men in Athens, that is gender relations, by the way, men in Athens began their education around the same time as Spartan boys were sent out into the woods to do basic training. And once they reached manhood, Athenian men were allowed to participate in that democracy. They could hold public office. And again, that all depended upon them being citizens. So if they had been born outside the city, that wasn't going to happen. And men were also allowed to serve in the army, which was an entirely volunteer force. You can actually see it. I love this little image here on the right. Notice that unlike the Spartans who had their uniform shields, the Athenian shields would be decorated with pictures of gods, family imagery, all sorts of seemingly random things because it was a volunteer force. They'd get together, they'd do a little bit of training, but they are not the elite super soldiers, whatever that means, of the Spartan army. Now, let's talk about the ladies.
Hello. I got bored listening to my husband talk, so we're going to talk about Athenian women. Women in Athens were treated similarly to other ancient Greeks. They did not have access to education, nor did they have many opportunities outside of the home. There were some exceptions to this rule, but for the most part, women were treated as second-class citizens, which you'll see a lot in this class.
Well, that was interesting. Anyhow, in a surprise to, absolutely nobody, these two cities, being as different as they were, meant that they spent most of their time engaged in some sort of maneuvering against one another. Sometimes it was political, sometimes it was military, but Athens and Sparta spent large amounts of their time fighting. However, they are going to be unified by one thing: Persia. Namely, when the Persians invade Greece, which will be the story for another time. Stay safe, stay dry. I will see you all hopefully tomorrow.